right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're all about crafting those perfect professional emails.
Email. It's one of those things, everyone uses it, but not everyone's great at it.
Totally. We've got some awesome expert advice and real-world examples to help you make your emails, uh, well, let's just say less cringe and way more effective.
Yeah, it's kind of like you don't want to be that person with the confusing subject lines and the rambling paragraphs, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding being annoying. There's a real strategy to it. Like, think about those subject lines. The first thing you see, it can make or break whether someone even opens your email.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about your own inbox. You see a subject line like project update, and you're like, ugh, another one. But then you see project update, marketing campaign launch date, and you're like, okay, this is important. I need to see this.
Yeah, it's like a little sneak peek that makes you want to know more. And our source material actually emphasizes just how crucial those subject lines are.
Right. Like they're not just a formality, they're prime real estate.
Totally.
Hmm.
So how do we make the most of that subject line magic?
Well, the research actually says keep it between 6 and 10 words. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
So concise, but informative.
Exactly. And don't forget those keywords, those terms that align with what the reader cares about.
Like if you're emailing someone about a marketing campaign, you might include words like engagement or ROI.
Yeah, stuff that grabs their attention and makes them think, oh, this is relevant to me. I better open this. You're kind of optimizing for the reader's brain, almost like SEO, but for email.
I love that analogy. So
Definitely.
we've got them to open the email, but how do we keep them reading? What about that greeting?
Okay, so greetings are super interesting. You've got this whole spectrum, right? From dear Mr. M's last name, all formal and stuff, to something more casual, like, hey, name.
And I'm guessing the choice depends on who you're emailing, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like how well you know them, the relationship, all that. But also, it's about your workplace, the culture there.
So if everyone in your company is super formal, you probably don't want to start an email with yo.
Haha, probably not. The key is to pay attention to what your colleagues are doing. Observe and adapt. And if you're emailing someone outside your company, well, then it's safer to be a bit more formal, just until you get a feel for their style.
Makes sense. So we got the subject line, the greeting, now what?
Now comes the hook. That first sentence. You've got to grab the reader's attention and make them want to keep reading.
It's all about making a good first impression. What does the source material suggest for that crucial opening line?
Well, they've got a couple of good strategies. You could start with a pleasantry, like, I hope this email finds you well. It adds a touch of warmth, especially if it's been a while since you've connected.
That's nice, but sometimes those pleasantries feel a little, I don't know, unnecessary,
Yeah.
especially if it's a quick question or something.
Yeah, I get that. And in those cases, the source material also suggests just getting straight to the point, like, I'm writing to follow up on our conversation about, or I have a question regarding, clear and direct.
So it's all about reading the room, so to speak,
Uh,
knowing when to be warm and fuzzy and when to get down to business.
Exactly. But the thing is, even when you're being direct, you still want to be polite and respectful.
Of course. Now, I think where a lot of us struggle is with the body of the email. How do we keep it concise and, well, not boring?
I think structure is key here,
Yeah.
and the source material actually has a really helpful framework. Introduction or context, main points, action items, and closing thoughts.
It's like a little roadmap for the reader, right?
Exactly. It helps you organize your thoughts and make sure you're covering all the bases. Like the introduction, it's super important, especially if it's someone you haven't emailed before.
Yeah, you need to give them some context, like, my name is your name from your department, and I'm reaching out to.
Yep.
Just a quick sentence or two to set the stage. Then you move into those main points, what you really want to talk about.
And this is where a lot of emails go wrong, right? They just become this wall of text that's hard to digest.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But the source material has some great tips for avoiding that, like breaking down your message into short paragraphs or even using bullet points. It makes it so much easier to read, especially on a screen.
Right. Because people stand, they don't really read every single word.
Exactly. And then come the action items, what you need the reader to do.
Instead of just saying, let me know what you think, you might say, please review the attached document and send me your feedback by Friday.
Yes, clear and specific, so there's no confusion about what you're asking.
It's about respecting your time and making it easy for them to take action. Now, all of this is great, but what about the tone and language we use?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Like, how formal should we be? Are contractions okay?
I always overthink those things. What does the source say? Well, they emphasize being professional and polite, but not stuffy.
So using phrases like, could you please, or I would appreciate it if,
Yeah,
instead of just demanding things.
exactly. And they also talk about contractions, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, like don't versus do not, or
Yeah.
can't versus cannot.
Right. In really formal situations, like, say, a job application, it's probably best to avoid contractions, but for everyday emails, they actually make your writing sound more conversational and friendly.
And who doesn't want to sound friendly?
Totally. But of course, there's a limit. You know, slang, emojis, anything super casual, those are still a no-go in professional emails.
Right. You always want to be mindful of your audience and the context.
And speaking of context, there's another really important aspect of email etiquette we should talk about: cultural sensitivity.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
This is something I'm super curious about. How can we be mindful of cultural differences when we're emailing someone from a different background?
Right, because what's considered polite or professional in one culture might be totally different in another.
Exactly. So how do we navigate those differences?
Well, for starters, just being aware that these differences exist is huge. Doing a little research about the culture you're communicating with can go a long way.
So, for example, in some cultures, directness is valued, while in others, it's more about building relationships first.
Exactly. And even things like how you address someone can vary, like whether you use their first name, last name, or a title. It's all about being respectful and understanding the norms.
And sometimes, it might even be helpful to explicitly acknowledge those differences. Like, I understand that your culture may have different communication norms, so please let me know if anything I say comes across as unclear or offensive.
That's a great tip. It shows that you're making an effort to be sensitive and avoid any potential misunderstandings.
And I think that leads perfectly into our next topic, grammar and clarity. Even if you're being culturally sensitive and using the right tone, a poorly written email can still make you look bad.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Typos, grammatical errors, unclear sentences, they can all undermine your credibility. It's like you're trying to present yourself as professional and competent, but then you send an email that's full of mistakes. It just sends the wrong message.
And it's so easy to make those mistakes, especially when we're rushing. What are some strategies for avoiding those grammar gremlins?
Well, the source material stresses the importance of proofreading, of course. But they go beyond that. They recommend reading your email out loud before sending it.
I love that tip. I've been doing that for years, and it's amazing how many errors you catch when you actually hear the words spoken aloud.
It forces you to slow down and pay attention to how the sentences flow. Sometimes you can read something silently and it seems fine, but then when you say it out loud, you realize it's clunky or confusing.
Absolutely. And it can also help you catch those subtle tone issues that might not be obvious in writing. Like maybe a sentence comes across as sarcastic or rude when you hear it spoken aloud.
Yeah, totally. It's like having a little editor in your head. And beyond proofreading, the source also recommends using short sentences and writing in active voice whenever possible.
Can you explain what that means for those of us who aren't grammar experts?
Sure, active voice basically means that the subject of the sentence is doing the action. So instead of saying, the meeting will be scheduled by my assistant, you would say, my assistant will schedule the meeting.
Oh, I see. It's more direct and concise.
Exactly. It makes your writing clearer and more engaging.
Okay, I'm going to have to start paying more attention to that in my own writing. Now, I'm curious about what the source has to say about closings and signatures. Are there any hard and fast rules there?
Well, they offer some classic closings that are always safe, like sincerely, best regards, or just a simple thank you if you've made a request. But they also emphasize choosing a closing that aligns with the tone of the email.
So if it's a super formal email, you might stick with sincerely. But if it's more casual, you can use something like best or cheers.
Right, it's all about finding that right level of formality. And of course, they also stress the importance of a professional signature block.
Yeah, that's something I've always wondered about. What exactly should be included in a signature block?
Well, at a minimum, it should have your full name, job title, company name, and contact information.
So it's like your digital business card.
Exactly. And it's also a chance to reinforce your personal brand, like you can include links to your website, LinkedIn profile, or any other relevant online presence.
That's a great point. It's about making the most of that little space at the bottom of your email.
For sure. Now, beyond the basics, the source material also gets into some special considerations that can really up your email game, like using reply all strategically.
The dreaded reply all. We've all been in those email chains that just spiral out of control.
Right. And the source has some good advice for avoiding those reply all disasters. Like before you hit that button, ask yourself, does everyone on this list really need to see my response?
It seems so obvious, but I bet it would save a lot of people from inbox overload.
Totally. And they also suggest being mindful of the original sender's intentions. Like if they emailed a specific group for a reason, you don't want to unnecessarily expand the audience. It's about respecting everyone's time and attention.
Absolutely. Now, what about urgent or sensitive topics? How do those play into email etiquette?
Well, for urgent stuff, they suggest using urgent in the subject line, but only when it's truly urgent.
Right, because if you use it for everything, it loses its meaning.
Exactly. And for sensitive topics, they recommend keeping your language neutral and factual.
So instead of saying, I'm really upset about this situation, you might say, I'm writing to express my concern about.
Exactly. It's about presenting your perspective calmly and professionally, even if you're feeling frustrated.
And sometimes it might even be better to have a phone call or a face-to-face conversation instead of trying to hash things out over email.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Sometimes email just isn't the right medium for sensitive or complex conversations.
Okay, I'm taking notes. Now, before we move on to the example email, what about attachments? Those can be a real pain point, both for the sender and the recipient,
They can be. The source material emphasizes mentioning any attachments in the body of the email, so the recipient knows to look for them.
which seems obvious, but I'm sure we've all received emails where someone mentions an attachment that's nowhere to be found.
It happens. And they also suggest using descriptive file names like marketing meeting notes January 23rd instead of just document 1 or file 2.
So giving the recipient more context and making it easier to find the file later.
Exactly. And for large files, they recommend using a cloud service link instead of attaching them directly to the email.
Oh, that's a good tip. It avoids those message size limit exceeded errors.
Totally. Plus, it lets you track whether the recipient has downloaded the file, which can be handy for follow-up.
I love that. It's like a little extra layer of accountability. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm excited to see how all of this comes together in that example email.
Me too. It's one thing to talk about these principles, but it's always helpful to see them in action.
Absolutely. So, are you ready to dive into that example email?
Oh, yeah, let's do it. Okay, so this example email, right? Just from skimming it, it's surprisingly short.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it's got everything, but it's not a novel or anything.
And that's a good thing. Remember how we talked about conciseness? This email nails it.
Totally. It's like they managed to pack in all the important stuff, the subject line, the greeting, a quick intro, bullet points for those main points, and even a clear call to action, all without going overboard.
Yeah, it proves you don't need to write a whole essay to get your message across. Sometimes less is definitely more.
And yet it still feels friendly, you know? Doesn't sound like a robot wrote it.
Exactly. That's what makes this example so effective. It shows that you can be professional and efficient without sacrificing personality. It's like the tone is spot on.
Okay, so let's talk about those common email mistakes. Remember that list the source gave us?
Oh, yeah, the pitfalls to avoid. It's interesting to see how this email, sidesteps all of them.
For sure. Like one of the big ones was sending those super long emails, the ones that make you scroll forever.
Yeah. Nobody wants to read a novel in their inbox. And this example, it's like the perfect counterexample. It shows you can communicate effectively without writing a book.
I'm so guilty of that, though.
Ah,
I always feel like I need to explain every little detail, but this email is making me rethink that approach.
it's a good reminder that sometimes brevity is key. And another mistake it avoids, being unclear about what you're asking. The call to action.
Oh, yeah. This email's super clear about that. It's like, please let me know your availability for a meeting next week. Boom, no ambiguity whatsoever.
Exactly. And that's so important, especially when you're dealing with deadlines or decisions that need to be made. You don't want people guessing what you need from them.
And the tone, too. It's professional all the way through. No slang, no emojis, no crazy exclamation points.
Yep. It walks that line between being approachable and being professional. It's friendly, but still appropriate for a work setting.
It's like they found the sweet spot. Not too stiff, not too casual.
Exactly. And it's clear that they proofread carefully. There are no typos, no grammar errors, which just makes the sender look more polished and professional. Like they took the time to get it right.
And it makes a difference. Those little errors, they can really undermine your credibility. It's like you're trying to make a good impression, but then you have a typo in your email, and it's all anyone can focus on.
It's true. Details matter.
They do. Oh, and we were talking about cultural sensitivity earlier, And while this specific email doesn't explicitly address cultural differences, it does demonstrate a pretty neutral and respectful tone.
You're right. It sticks to clear, straightforward language and avoids any humor or references that might not translate well across cultures.
Which is a good reminder that even when you're not specifically thinking about cultural differences, it's still important to be mindful of your language and make sure you're being inclusive.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about this example email, but are there other types of emails that people often get stuck on?
Oh, for sure. What about those super long email threads? The ones that go on forever with a million replies and forwards?
Oh, those are the worst. But yeah, the source has some good tips for handling those. Like when you're replying to a thread, only include the relevant parts of the previous messages.
So instead of just hitting reply all and sending the whole chain, you actually take a minute to trim it down. Just include what's actually needed for context.
Exactly. It helps keep things focused and organized. And they also suggest changing the subject line when you're starting a new thread within an existing conversation.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So instead of just having re project update, you might change it to project update meeting schedule or something like that.
Yep. It signals to everyone that you're shifting gears and focusing on a specific aspect of the conversation.
It's like creating a new chapter in the email saga.
Uh-huh. I like that. Okay. Now, remember how we talked about attachments? Those can be tricky.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They can cause all sorts of problems if they're not handled properly.
Right. So the source has some great tips for avoiding those attachment pitfalls, like sending attachments in a format that everyone can open.
So sticking with the classics like PDF or Word docs instead of those weird file types that nobody knows how to open.
Exactly. It's about making sure your recipient can actually access the information you're sending and compressing those large files.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Because
And
nobody wants to wait forever for a giant file to download, especially if they're on their phone.
right. And it helps avoid those annoying message size limit exceeded errors.
Ugh, those are the worst.
Ah.
It's like you put all this effort into crafting the perfect email, and then it bounces back because the attachment is too big.
So frustrating. And we talked about using cloud services for big files, which is a good idea. But the source also mentions being careful about using cloud storage for sensitive information.
That makes sense. You want to make sure it's secure and that you follow your company's policies.
Definitely. Okay, now, does the source talk about any other specific types of emails that people find challenging?
You know what? I'm always struggling with follow-up emails, like how to be persistent without being annoying.
Oh, yeah, those can be tricky. But the source actually has a whole section on writing effective follow-up emails.
Okay, tell me everything. What's the
Well,
secret?
well, first of all, be patient. Don't send a follow-up like 5 minutes after the first email. Give people time to respond.
So maybe wait a few days or even a week, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and when you do send a follow-up, start by referencing the original email or conversation, so they know what you're talking about.
So instead of just saying just checking in, you might say, following up on my email from last week regarding,
Exactly. And then reiterate your request or question, just to remind them.
but do it politely,
And
right?
of course, you don't want to sound like you're nagging. And you could even offer a helpful suggestion or ask if they need any more info from you.
It's about showing that you're genuinely interested in moving things forward, not just bugging them.
Right. It's about being proactive and helpful. Okay, now shifting gears a bit. What about managing our inboxes? That can be a whole challenge in itself.
Oh my gosh, yes. Sometimes I open my inbox and it's like staring into the abyss. So many emails.
Yeah.
Where do I even start?
I feel you. But the source actually offers some great tips for taming that email beast and getting things under control.
Okay, lay it on me. I need all the help I can get.
Well, they suggest setting aside specific times to check and respond to emails, instead of constantly checking throughout the day.
So creating dedicated email blocks in your schedule.
Exactly. It helps you stay focused on other tasks and prevents you from getting sucked into that email vortex.
Oh, yeah, I need that. I get so easily distracted by those little notification pop-ups.
I know, right? And they also recommend using filters and folders to organize your inbox. You can create filters that automatically send emails from certain senders or with certain keywords into specific folders.
So it's like having a personal assistant for your email.
Pretty much. It helps you prioritize what's important and avoid missing crucial messages.
I love that. And what about those newsletters and promotional emails? I swear they multiply like rabbits.
Oh, yeah, those can be a real pain, but the source recommends unsubscribing from anything you don't actually read.
It's so satisfying to hit that unsubscribe button, right?
It is. And they also suggest using the mark as read feature liberally,
Hmm.
just to clear out the visual clutter and stay focused on what needs your attention.
It's like hitting the reset button on your inbox. Okay, so thinking about all this, it really highlights that email etiquette is about so much more than just knowing the rules.
Right. It's about being a good communicator. It's about thinking about your audience, being respectful of their time, and using email in a way that's clear, effective, and, well, not annoying.
And maybe even a little bit enjoyable, right? Because let's face it, we're all going to be using email for a long time to come, so we might as well make the most of it.
Totally. Now, as we wrap up, what's resonating most with you from all this? Like, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think the biggest thing for me is the importance of being intentional with email. It's so easy to get caught up in the chaos and let it control you. But we actually had a lot more power than we think. We can choose how we use email, how we manage our inboxes, and how we communicate with others.
That's a great insight. It's about taking control and making email work for us instead of the other way around.
Exactly. Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we do, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question. So as we wrap up thinking about all this email stuff, I want to throw out a big question. Yeah. Email etiquette today is one thing, but what about the future? How do you think email is going to change in the years to come with, all the new tech and how workplaces are evolving?
Oh, man, that's a good one. It's tough to predict the future, but I do think we'll see some shifts for sure. Like you've got all these new communication tools popping up all the time, instant messaging platforms, project management software, all that stuff.
Right. And sometimes those tools just feel so much faster and easier for like quick questions or casual chats.
Totally. But I think even with all that, email is probably going to stick around, at least for those more formal communications and like creating a record of important decisions and stuff. It's like the official document of the business world.
Yeah, it's kind of like having that paper trail just in case.
Exactly. But the way we use email, that might change. I could definitely see AI playing a bigger role,
Mhm.
helping us manage those crazy inboxes, draft emails, maybe even personalize our messages based on who we're emailing.
Whoa, that's kind of mind-blowing. Imagine an AI that could like analyze your emails and tell you if you're being too harsh or if your tone is off.
Right. It could save us from so many awkward email moments. And think about all the time it could save us. Instead of spending hours, stressing over every word, we could be focusing on the stuff that really matters, like actually getting work done.
This is the dream, right? To have email work for us, not against us.
Totally. It's about using email as a tool to be more productive, more efficient, and ultimately more successful.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive on email etiquette. Hopefully, you're walking away with some fresh ideas and feeling more confident about conquering your inbox.
And hey, remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being mindful, respectful, and using email as a tool to build those strong relationships and get things done.
Absolutely. Now, if you have any awesome email tips or stories you want to share, we'd love to hear them. Until next time, happy emailing, everyone.